born in Rockaway. I was in the Rockaway Beach Hospital. Why? Because my grandmother had a rooming house in Auburn. That was a small town in the Rockaways. And I imagined that my mother wanted to be near her mother. So although we lived in the Bronx, because I was married, I was born September 5th. And I have pictures of myself as an infant being held in my grandmother's arms. So we probably didn't go back to the Bronx till maybe I was 4 months old, I would say. My mother's mother, her name was Fanny Schomburn, and my grandfather's name was Benjamin Schomburn, and they said he was the mayor of Auburn. I don't think he worked, but he just walked all around and carried me all over because I was the first grandchild. They had a boarding house. So in the winter months, I have one first cousin and my brother. We would go there on Sundays and play hide and seek in all the rooms. We would go every Sunday and my grandmother would make a big meal. My grandmother also had a son. His name was Irving Schomburn. He married Ruth, and they had one daughter, Carol. So I have one first cousin. When I married into the Weinbergs, there were 20 first cousins, like in the Nyvert family, and I only had one first cousin with whom I'm still friendly. She's ill. She lives in Washington Heights, but she's not well. In Rockaway at the beach, and every summer, we had a locker. We belonged to a beach club. And we had a locker, and we would wear one bathing suit, then we would leave it there to dry. We had a pool, so I learned to swim. And I had few friends. I wasn't very popular. And when I was young, we would play jacks, and we would buy movie magazines, and we would buy scrapbooks, and we would cut out pictures of the movie stars. That's what I remember doing. Arnold was 7 years younger, or 7.5, and I don't remember even talking to him. He was into sports, and he had his own friends, and my mother favored my brother, because he was born sickly, from what I understand. So I was more with my father, and he was with his mother. My father had one job all his life. I'm very proud, one of my most proud possessions is a letter when my mother died and my father remarried, and he and his second wife, Molly, decided to move to Florida, and he retired from his job. And he belonged to the Credit Men's Association, and they wrote him a letter saying what a wonderful member he was and how he helped all the other firms. He worked for a dress manufacturing place called Star Made Dress, and he was ahead of maybe 6 people in the office. But I regret that my father lived with me for 6 years, and I never asked him about his life growing up. I went to PS 39 in Far Rockaway. We had a walk because later Far Rockaway was divided, Far Rockaway and Bayswater. Bayswater was like nicer homes away from the business section. But I had to walk to school every morning, maybe 5, 6, 7 blocks, but we just did it. And one day when I was about 4th grade, I was called to the principal's office. And I thought, what did I do? I'm really a goody-goody. And he said to me, and he called about 3 other children, he said, we're skipping you. So I skipped. So I graduated public school at 12 and college at 16. Being my birthday was September, I started school right away. So when I graduated college, I was only, about 16. So when I graduated high school, I took the academic course, and I majored in Spanish. And if you major in Spanish, you have to take another language, and I took French. And it just so happened this week, I was speaking to my oldest son, and they said something in French. And he said to me, "Mother, I never knew that you could speak French." I said, "Well," I explained, "when you major in a language, you have to take another language." So I got into Hunter College, which is free. The only thing we paid for is books. And we would go and get secondhand books. Now, in order to get to Hunter College, was in the Bronx, and I lived in Long Island. I would walk to the station to get the Long Island Railroad, which was maybe a 50-minute walk, and you always get there a little bit early. We would go to Penn Station. The train would come in at one end, and I would walk to the complete opposite to take the 6th Avenue subway to the last stop, Hunter College. And then I would have to walk 2 blocks to the college. She was a housewife. She didn't have to work. And we had a maid. The maid's name was Addie. And I never did a thing in the house. If you ask me where was the washing machine, I don't know a thing. But Thursday night was maid's day off. And after we ate, my mother would say, "Mildred, the dishes." And I would sit at the table and cry. "I don't want to do dishes. I don't want to do dishes." And then my father would say, "Mildred, the dishes." And I would go in the kitchen and wash the dishes, and the tears would be coming down. We were members, but not like I in Scranton. You know, we would go just on the holidays. And to my regret, my father started me in Hebrew school in the middle of the year. And I said to him, "I don't want to go anymore. The children are so far ahead of me." And he let me drop out, which I always regretted. But when my 4 children went to Hebrew school here, they taught me, and now I can read Hebrew. And I enjoy going to temple every Saturday. And then we graduated, and we made our own graduation gowns, because I have a picture here of me in my graduation gown. We were married in a theater. I mean, we graduated in a theater to have more room. And in the summer, when I went to college, I used to have some of my friends come out and visit me. I had a very tiny bedroom. All my life, like in the apartment, so I was sleeping there. And when my friends would come, we'd have to open the bed to make it for 2 people to sleep. We'd have to step over the bed to get the person near the wall. And we'd play tennis. I always liked to play tennis. I was always athletic. Well, my best friend from public school was Camilla Deischer. And she, when I went to college, she became a nurse. And she married a man. The war was ending, and she married, I believe, I've never met him, a paraplegic that came home. And she went to live in Encino, California. And I went to visit her twice. And we would write to each other, and I would visit her twice. Now, the first day, practically, I met my second best friend, whose name is Jessie from the Bronx, and we stayed friendly. She moved to Florida also, and I went down to see her 2 or 3 or 4 times. But then she became ill. Her mind completely left her, and she went out to be in California with her daughter, and I never saw her again. During college, I loved to dance. And until I had this little trouble with my arm, I'd be the first one on the dance floor. At City College, every Friday afternoon, they'd have not a band, but maybe a jukebox. And I would go there and I would dance every single number until I would look at my timetable and say, uh-oh, I have to leave, like on the 6:01 train back to Far Rockaway. We lived in Far Rockaway until my mother died. And I had a wonderful aunt who was very close with my mother, who was very good to us. And she said, don't stay here any longer, move to Washington Heights, 207th Street, on the 8th Avenue subway, going to Manhattan. And we moved in there, and shortly after my father remarried. Oh, almost every summer, I used to come to Carbondale, which is a small town near here. I stayed with my aunt and uncle who had no children, and they were wonderful to me. And I met my husband, and we kind of liked each other, but I had a lot of boyfriends in New York too, who were all studying to be engineers. And his family was in the barrel business. Maybe if my mother was living, she would have said, I don't think he's the right one for you. But I married him, and we had our ups and downs. I was 16. Yeah, she had cancer. She lost the breast. She had cancer. And my father always said he took her to the best doctor on Fifth Avenue. But she died, and she was in bed about 2 years. Right, so, but I went to college then, you know, and we had the help in the house. And this aunt that we were so close with, she would come out weekends and stay with her. Ida Ackerman, I'm my mother's first cousin. My mother did not go to high school. I have a picture of my mother behind a typewriter. So she went to work. My mother always told me, I believe, that she loved to dance. And at that time, she used to go with her brother. And they would be dancing, places where everybody danced. So I always loved to dance. One year, and I was not very happy. I guess I felt he was disloyal to my mother because I was young, but I didn't realize my father was young. Maybe he was in his 40s, and I only later realized that I was so wrong. But I became extremely friendly with my stepsister. My stepmother's daughter, Florence Kaliski, and her husband and 2 children. They were like my family. And every year I would visit her in Florida. I was a teacher at that time, and I used to come for my Thanksgiving vacation. I used to come to Florida. And when the first time I got off the plane, I said to my brother-in-law, oh, it's so beautiful here. Look at the palm trees. And he said, Mildred, this is all fake. He said, when I come to visit you in Scranton and we go through the Poconos, that's beautiful. There isn't one tree that was indigenous to the state. Everything is planted in Florida. It was swamps. Yes, I can exactly remember. I was at my aunt's house in Carbondale, and my uncle had a nephew, and I was the niece of my aunt, and he was going to Scranton to meet friends, and my aunt said, take Mildred along. And we went to a house in Scranton. I know I was wearing a green skirt with a bolero and a blouse. I met Davy, and we started dancing, and we went on and off ever since then. Handsome. My granddaughter Rebecca calls him a hunk. She called him hunk. I have pictures of him in his Navy uniform. Now, should I tell you about we decided to get married? I would say 1942, and he was stationed in Jacksonville, Florida. So I asked my father if I could go down and visit him. And at that time, you know, you really didn't go to visit men, but I did go. I got the money from my father, and I went to visit him in Jacksonville. I guess I stayed a brief time that I didn't have school, and I came back, and we would write all the time. And then he came up in June, and I said, I want to get married, you know, and he said, I was going to ask you. And it must have been a Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday, and we had to be married Friday before Shabbos. And my father arranged, I was married in the house, my apartment building, with just a few relatives. And then we went to a kosher restaurant. And then we went to a hotel for our honeymoon, and then Davy left on Monday. And then after a while, he was stationed in Washington. I went to Seattle, and we stayed like in a one-bedroom, and I got a job at an aircraft plant. When the planes, he was in the Navy there, and I had a job cleaning the planes when they came back. We used to go in with the Hoover or rags and clean it all up. And I had my friends. And one day I said to my friend, I won't be coming in next week for name some days. And they said, why? Now you have to realize during the war, many people came to Seattle to make money from Iowa, from Kansas, and some neighboring states. And I said, because I'm Jewish, and it's our holidays are coming up. And they went in one group and said, you're Jewish? I said, yes. And they said, we heard that Jews have horns. This is before the war. And I said, well, here I am. And they really learned something. And I often tell this story when we talk about the war or something like that. So this is the truth, how it was in the 1930s and 40s. He had two stripes, I'm trying to think. He would fix the planes. He was on aircraft carrier. And he would, when the planes came in, he would, anything that had to be done on it, he did. And then I became pregnant. Then he was stationed to San Francisco, and I went to San Francisco. And I had a friend with whom I lived. And he used to come in weekends, and I had a job in Woolworths, behind the food counter. Years ago, Woolworths had a food counter. And it was so hard when you brought up a whole box, can, whatever you want, carton of ice cream, and it's so hard, and you have to take it out. And I stayed there until he was sent overseas. And I came home and lived with my Aunt Hannah and Uncle Charlie, because my father had a stepmother. He was on an aircraft carrier. So he was in Hawaii sometimes, but he was mostly on the aircraft carrier, going from island to island. And we never talked too much about it. From what I gather, a lot of people don't talk about the war. We just never did. Came home. Stevie was, I think, his first birthday party. And when he came home, I left my aunt and uncle, and we got an apartment in Scranton. It was a second floor. There were three. It was, I would say, something like 601 Monroe Avenue. And on the second floor, we had a small kitchen and a bathroom, and I guess a living room and a small hall that I made for a dining room. And I guess we had 3 bedrooms. And then the landlord said, when I became pregnant with Barbara, I rented this with 1 child and then rented for 3 children. You better find another apartment. So we bought a house on 924 Madison. And we lived there until I moved here. He bought a truck, and he hauled different things. Sometimes it used to be material, bolts of materials, barrels, ladders. He worked for a ladder company. Different people hired Davy to haul different places. He was a very good driver. All the Weinbergs are very good drivers. Sometimes he would go away if the job, you know, and he only came home weekends, wherever he had found a job, until finally he got a job from the power plant in Berwick, which I could see out of my window on a clear day. And then he got a very good job. And he stayed there for 10 years until the power plant was finished. And he was ready to retire, and then he would drive people. Davy was fine, really, because he wasn't in battle. It's true he was on a ship and there was a hurricane, but I don't think he was, you know, really. Yes, he went to temple every Saturday, and he was always early. We were always the first one. So if you say that you're picking me up at a certain time, I'll be down there 10 minutes early, because that's in me, to always be early. That's another subject. I didn't even know what kosher was, living in my house with my mother. We just didn't eat pork and ham. So when I went to my Aunt Hannah, lived with her, she was strictly kosher. So she taught me. So my house was not only do you have 2 sets of dishes, for Passover, you have to have 2 sets of dishes also. But I had a wonderful life in Carbondale, wonderful. My oldest son was born in Carbondale, Stephen. He's named after my mother. Her name was Sadie. The people in the Jewish religion name children after relatives that have passed away. Neil Robert Weinberg.
Named after?
I guess somebody in the Weinberg family, because I didn't have a Robert. Then came Barbara, her name is Barbara Fay, and she was named after my grandfather Benjamin and his wife Fanny. So it's Barbara Fay. And then Alan, maybe somebody in the Weinberg family. We would share. And our block was a wonderful block to raise children on. It was children in every house. And they would somehow all be in front of my house. And when my husband would come home and park the car, he couldn't even get out of the car and walk into the house because there were so many children playing, and up the alley they would play baseball. Our house had a hill in the back, and we were noted from all of the children around that they would go up in the wintertime with their sleds, walk up and come down, and they had to go between 2 houses. We had children there all day long. I was always running and hanging up the winter coats, the gloves, and the hat. And the boots were there. And among my friends, we would share, like when the boots, the boots would go from one child to another. And then when they got to be about 6 or 7, they went to Hebrew school. And every Saturday, they had older children that walked them to Hebrew school. And they had to go, when they were about 7, they had to go to Hebrew school Monday night, after school, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So they had a very good Hebrew education. Very tough, until my husband got a job at the power plant and I got a job teaching school. Now I'll tell you about my first job. Alan, the children, they were in high school, so they didn't come home, but Alan came home for lunch, and my father was living with me. My father played pinochle at the JCC with 2 other men. They used to walk together to the JCC. And the man said to my father, you know, my daughter has a job and she needs somebody to drive her. So my husband used the truck, but we had a car. You'd be amazed at what I did. I would pick her up every morning at 9 o'clock, and we would go to the grocery stores, and we would count the food on the shelf. Then we had papers to fill out. And thank God at that time they didn't have so many cereals. And then we were allowed to go in the back and see how much they have in the back, and we would count everything. And there's a word, she had maybe, and she had to send it into a certain company, and that was my first job. Going to the grocery stores and counting the food. So we had a turkey, and the kosher turkeys, because the way they kill them, have a lot of feathers. And I spent the night before taking all the feathers out. I had to do that the day before, and I put it on the back porch in my big turkey pan. But the porch had a little opening, about 4 or 5 inches. On the next morning, when I got up to put the turkey in the oven, a cat had come and bitten. So I was practically, I think I cried, but Davy ran up to the butcher and we bought something else to make for Thanksgiving. About 4 blocks away, it was called Madison School. And my landlady, she had older children than mine, and they would go to school together. And they came home for lunch, but later on, they went to high school. Stevie went to Columbia. Stevie got a full scholarship to University of Scranton, but he didn't want to take it. I remember my father saying, "What, are you crazy?" But Stevie wanted to go to Columbia, and he went. And Neil, I wanted him to go to college. So Stevie, Neil, the council said he's not college material. So I said, I went to school to the guidance teacher and took home the book with all the colleges. And I'm looking through, and I see Delaware School of Agriculture. And I figured, that'll be good for Neil. He's no rocket scientist. So Stevie and I, and too bad he's not here, Stevie and I went, had an appointment, University of Delaware, and by the time we left, Neil was in. So we didn't have money, so Neil used to get up in the morning and milk the cows, and then at 4 o'clock, I think you have to milk them again. On our weekends, he drove a milk tanker. He used to come up to all the little farms where they would leave the milk on the road, and Neil would pour it into the tanker and take it back to Philadelphia to ice cream. Barbara didn't want to go to college, and at that time they gave free. Computer was just coming in, and there was a 1 or 2 year course free. So Barbara took the computer, and she was one of the first on the computer, and she went to work different places, and she worked mostly at the Mercy Hospital for years until she married Lou. At that time, I had a little money. I was already working. Davy was working. He went to Penn State, but he didn't take it seriously, and his marks weren't good, and so he never finished college. Okay, I was doing the surveys, and one day at club, one of my friends said to me and another woman, "You know, you went to college. Why don't you become a teacher?" We both said, "I don't know, I never thought of it." So I had another friend. I've always had many friends in my life. And one night she said to me, "I have to see the teacher at Central High School. Come with me, and there's a PTA meeting." So I went with her. I stood outside while she spoke to her teacher, and then we went into the auditorium, and the principal came out and said, "Anybody have any questions?" So I raised my hand and said, "How come When the Spanish teacher isn't there, they have a study period. And the principal said, because we have no Spanish substitutes. So after was a reception, cake and coffee. I went up to him. I said, I majored in Spanish. He said, just send me your transcript. And I sent away, and I started subbing right away. I had my name in maybe 5 schools. And at that time, some of the public schools in 7th and 8th grade were teaching Spanish also. But they had me teaching French. I went in for German, I went in for Latin, and I worked every single day. But meanwhile, I kept looking and looking and looking for a job, and I found a permanent job, Mid-Valley School District. I taught 9th grade Spanish. And then after a number of years, I had a little difference with the principal, and I retired. So, being athletic, I was sitting at the bowling alley of the JCC when a lady came over to me and said, Mildred, you're just the person to lead the seniors. I said, I don't know anything about leading seniors. She said, you're the person. I said, well, I am going to Florida for a week or something like that. She said, it's okay. And so that's how I started with the JCC. And I had a glorious 30 years taking the people all over. It wasn't from, we'd say we'd start, in March we went to the mountains from Monday to Friday. April we went someplace, May, June, July, August, September, we went to the mountains, and or October, and I didn't go anyplace December, January, and February. But for years, I took the people all over. Some were one-day trips. It was only overnight if we went to the mountains. And there are people here that will tell you the wonderful time we had. He was always like an angel. But when anything happened on our block, they used to say it was Neil. Neil was mischievous if somebody's flowers were stepped on. But I had a wonderful Italian neighbor who said to me, Mildred, from the worst is going to be the best. And that's Neil. He's just wonderful. She was a tomboy. When my father and stepmother came out, they would bring her a dress. She would never, ever put on a dress. When she had to go for a haircut, and she had a Buster Brown haircut. Later, her hair got so curly, I'd have to run around to get her to go to the beauty parlor to get a haircut. Barbara never wore a dress, and in the back, she played baseball with the boys. And she even has a spot where on her face where one of the boys hit her with the baseball. She was always a tomboy. Oh, after he graduated high school, a very good friend of ours, sent him to Israel for a year, and he loved it. It was a wonderful year. Then he came back, and he went to work something at automobile parts, but then he went to Penn State, and he just never finished. And then he had a friend who put him in the insurance line, so now he sells insurance. I just want to tell you, I had an uncle in New York City that lived by himself. He married very late in life, and his wife had died. And one day I was in New York with my husband, and I said, let's visit Uncle Irving. It was a 4th floor walk up in Queens. And when I saw him, he might have broken one hand or something. And he was living by himself, and I said, you're coming to live with me. My father had passed away, so I had an extra bedroom. And my children, like Neil and Stevie, Ellen was very young, and they went to New York and they brought him to my house, and he stayed with me until he died. And he's buried here in Dalton with his brother. His name was Irving Langer. He enjoyed being with my children and their friends. but he only stayed during the summer because I had to go back to school in September, and I didn't know what I was going to do. But unfortunately, he went to the VA and he died. I had so many good memories. We just had fun. We just my husband, when it came to put the children to sleep, he was the one that gave them their baths. We'd put the four of them, I think, at once in the bathtub, like you do, and he'd put them to bed. Right, and we were poor but happy, with the sleigh riding in the backyard and the children going to school. We used to go to my mother-in-law, but my mother-in-law had 5 boys and a girl. My sister-in-law Helen didn't marry till a long time later on, and it was Henry and Peggy who had 2 children, Harry and Jean that had 3 children. We had 2 children, but my brother-in-law Maury married a Kingston girl, lived in Kingston. And my mother-in-law and Helen said, we can't do this. It's just too many people. It's too much work for them. That's when I started the holidays in my house. And I'm sure Jean and Harry did the same. But the family's very close, especially with Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. Going to New York with my Mahjong club, we used to save $1 a week. And originally we used to go on the train, and they'd put something down the seat, and we would have breakfast on the train. Then we would take the tube over into Manhattan. And I didn't always stay with them at the hotel because I had an aunt that lived on 72nd Street. And we used to stand on line for the twofers. And we saw a show Friday night and Saturday afternoon. And we would have supper Friday night, and then Saturday afternoon they would go shoe shopping on 34th Street, and then we'd see a show, and we were always home by Saturday night. The men would be at the bus terminal waiting for us like we had just come from Europe. When I first started, when I was a little girl in Far Rockaway, and we sat in the balcony, musical was $1.10, and remember, like Gaslight, but the Dead End Kids was the first show I saw, and that was 55 cents. Oh, so many. I've seen so many. King and I, and I loved straight plays. The musicals, the first musical, what's his name? And when we went to see the one that took place in London, it was so good. My Fair Lady, so good that I went home and I got a ticket for Davy, and I went back to see it with him. Oh, and I love Bob Fosse. Oh, I can't even name. I kept every program, including Barbra Streisand, till I could get it for your wholesale. And now when I moved to my apartment here, Davy said, you're not bringing them. So I didn't know what to do with them all, but I knew a man interested in the theater, and I gave him all my programs. Oh, I can't even begin to tell you all the shows, all the musicals, all Oscar Hammerstein and straight plays that I saw. My mother gave me tap dancing lessons and piano lessons, because when I go to your house and I play a little bit, I think your grandson's amazed. I was always chubby when I was young. So when she gave me calisthenics, maybe I could do a tumble saw, but I could never do a cartwheel. So I took elocution, piano, and dancing lessons. I had a very nice childhood. My husband on the barrel truck. Well, I didn't pay any attention. I didn't go to the barrel yard. I was busy home with the children. I knew where it was, but well, this doesn't look like barrels, so this must have been, maybe he was hauling this. See, and he worked very hard because he had to lift up all these barrels. So he'd come home and he'd go eat supper and go to sleep. We only have one picture on our wedding day. This is it, because I was married in my father's apartment. Here's pictures of George. He was in Colorado. It was Davies. It's just Davies' book. And this is his memorabilia from the war. My Uncle Irving, my father's brother, lived with us almost all his life, my mother's married life. Shared a room with my brother.
Yeah.
We had 3 bedrooms, my mother and my father, my brother and my uncle. We had a bed that pulled apart, and there was a middle in it. And he married this woman. She wasn't Jewish, and he felt kind of ashamed, and he didn't marry her until after his mother had died. This is my grandfather Adolf. That's my father's father. This was his wife, my grandmother Rose. Now this is Davy's grandmother and grandfather. This is my mother-in-law and father-in-law, which you have a beautiful picture in there. And this is my Aunt Hannah and Uncle Charlie, with whom I lived. This is my mother's brother and his wife, and Carol, my only first cousin. They were both school teachers. This is my mother and father on their wedding. This is my mother and father later on. This is Grandma Weinberg when she lived in her house, which is just a block. This is my husband's the 4 brothers, Davy, George, Henry, and Maury. This is Davy and I on our wedding day. This is the hunk. This is me when I was young. Naturally, I'm wearing a bathing suit because I was always at the beach. This is Helen and one of her brothers, Harry. And I had 3 Eagle Scouts, and Barbara always went to Girl Scout camp. Grandma Nivett was very big in Girl Scout camp. And this is my grandfather, Benjamin, and this is their wedding with my grandmother. My grandmother and grandfather, and all her sisters and brothers. And in fact, they came from Khatin. No, that's Davy's family. No, I have the name someplace, a very long name from Hungary. I can't put my finger on everything I have. I don't know, but my mother and father were born in New York, which is very unusual. I'm very fortunate. If I didn't have this accident, I would be driving, and now I don't walk that well, but I just came from the doctor. I said, "Doctor, should I use a cane?" He said, "No." He said, "Sometimes people fall with a cane." So I have my husband's walker in there when the time comes. But I'm very fortunate here. Yesterday we had a program called Tales of the Towers. This is called The Towers. And those that wanted told funny stories about their past life. And of course I told one. Well, I could tell you this one. Barbara took us to an island with Rebecca. Just Barbara, Rebecca, and I went to this island. And I always kept a scissor in my purse. Because sometimes you go on a trip and you buy new clothes and you can't tear off the label, you know? So I had gotten this scissor when I went to Spain once, and I brought each one of my Mahjong friends a little gift. It was a small town next to Madrid, and it was called Damascene. It was gold with black. And I bought myself a ring, but it wasn't expensive and it wore out. but had given my girlfriend a scissor. So she had passed away, and one day I said to her husband, you know, Sheldon, what happened to that scissor I bought for Leona when I went to the islands? He said, you know, Mildred, funny you should ask. It's sitting in the drawer, and I don't know what to do with it. So I said, would you mind giving it to me? So when I went to the islands with Barbara and Rebecca, I put it in my luggage. And even though they went through, they didn't see the scissor. We're leaving the island, and we're packing, and I decide to put it in my purse. But Rebecca says, Grandma, don't put it in your purse, put it in your luggage. Rebecca's a very smart girl. So I said, no, I'm gonna, and sure enough, they open up my purse, and they take the scissor out, which had memories for me. And I said to them, I went like this, and Rebecca had gone through first, and she's looking at me. And I felt so badly, and I lost that Damascene scissor that I had bought years ago for my friend. And I was taking it whenever I went on a trip. That's a story I told. I had a girlfriend who could not say a sentence without a Yiddish word. So everything that I learned from my girlfriend. I'm teaching a lot of my non-Jewish women, you know, like you have a lot of chutzpah. That means you're nervy. And they're all they're starting to use all these Jewish words. I couldn't wish for anything more than what I have. No more money. I'm just happy living here. I love this building. My darling, July 1945. I haven't written for 3 days, and the time, Uncle Irving and Aunt Nettie were here. Oh, this is my writing to him. I'll make this a long letter to make up for it. First, I am enclosing the picture of Stephen and I that appeared in the Scranton Times. I can't say everyone agrees with me. I'm also enclosing a letter I saw published in a magazine. I guess it expressed your sentiment in learning of your fatherhood. Well, my aunt and uncle arrived Sunday afternoon. We spent the rest of the day talking. They are so wonderful, such pleasant company to have around. They are a help, not just guests to wait on. Sitting on the porch, Uncle decided the walls were dirty. So Monday morning, Uncle Irving and Aunt Nettie cleaned the porch, and it was a job, top to bottom, in the chairs. The walls never got such a good cleaning, and also the floor. In the afternoon, we dressed to go to town when it rained. After a while, Aunt and I took a short walk and got caught in it. In the evening, I went with Aunt Nettie and Aunt Hannah to bingo. It was a $1 bingo with $15 and $25 prizes. I don't think I ever read this. And one extra special card, 25 cents. But we all had no luck. Afterwards, we went for spaghetti and meatballs. Tuesday morning, we three again cleaned the car. It needs a simonizing, and therefore we cleaned the inside mostly. It sure needed it, as Uncle hadn't cleaned it in God knows how many years. This is the way he is. I don't want to say that. It also explains for his station economically. I wrote with you he lost his license. I don't remember if I explained why. Well, it cost $118. Well, and he refuses to pay it, but he also wants to drive. If he is caught driving without a license, he might go to jail. So Aunt Hannah and he are always fighting over his driving. But that's him. He doesn't care about the law. He thinks he owns Carbondale, can do anything. So I went to simonize the car, and gradually I know it is hard, so I'll do a little whenever I am in the mood. and cool and not tired. I also want to paint the porch furniture. It's usually terrible how Uncle Charlie doesn't help Aunt Hannah in anything, even when I'm not here. You'd think with the window and attic a little, but he doesn't care. My uncle didn't make much money. I don't know how they lived. Well, Tuesday afternoon, we three women went to town. Uncle minded Stephen, but really went to spend a lot of money. We bought Aunt Nettie an anniversary present. It will cost us about $2. She is so lovely. She brought with her a box of candy for us, special lollipops for Stephen with vitamin A and D added, and hankies for Aunt Hannah and me, and a sachet bag for each of us. They are always giving Stephen and I so many gifts. You'll love them when you get to know them better. I don't know if I wrote you that right after my mother died, Aunt Nettie was operated on for the same thing. But thank God she is good. She got another lump in her shoulder and just underwent 11 treatments, and it dissolved. I sure hope everything turns out okay for her. Tuesday night we had about 3 people here. First we played Michigan Rummy, $1. We play a penny apiece, and I won about $1.30. I usually love poker, but never play for big stakes. For a penny or two, like last night, I think it's just right. I sit on my pairs. Oh, one lady was so good. Your friend Sylvia Goldstein. I don't even remember reading this. I believe in playing conservatively and getting everyone to come along and then win. If you raise everything, then everybody drops out. What do you think? We had a lot of fun anyhow, and I had so many pennies. They kept falling on the floor. Then this afternoon we went out for lunch to a house in Clifford. It gave Aunt Hannah a chance to rest and not be busy cooking. Then we went to the lake. It was too cool for bathing. The weather has been wonderful to me so far. Cool but not hot. They left at the 7 o'clock tonight. Aunt Nettie has to go to the doctor tomorrow for a checkup. After they left, I fed, bathed, and put Stephen to sleep and did my washing. You'd be surprised at the amount of washing I have every day. Before I have another, I'll want a Bendix. Is that a deal? Our baby only likes to dance. He jumps up and down in everyone's arms. He goes to everyone. He likes dogs, too, and goes after them. He doesn't say, I never gave this to Stephen. He doesn't say car yet, but knows what they are and loves to watch them, the trucks and the trains. This is enough for me now. Yo te amo. We always said that to each other. That's Spanish. I love you.